The need for Mohg's body in the ascension ritual of Miquella and his promised consort came as a surprise to many, as much as it did to Ansbach. However, it didn't come as much of a surprise to Freya, who almost immediately understood and accepted what was happening after learning the nature of the vow. While this could have been due to understanding the desire of her battle-obsessed boss to return to take part in presumably the greatest battle of all time. This information came from Ansbach, and likely included the part about occupying Mohg's vessel. So I wonder if as one of his closest confidants, she perhaps also understood that this could be a way for her favorite general to overcome the difference that led to his previous humiliating defeat at the hands of Morgott. To ensure the reason he, mightiest of the demigods, found himself grounded and laying on his back, would never be an issue again. The answer lies in the ancient bestial bloodline of the Omen, and the cursed blessings that are its legacy. But before we explore the details of why an Omen's accursed blood and body are the solution to Radahn's problem, and the key to crafting a god, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Manta Sleep. They actually sent me the product to try, so I could be assured I wasn't advertising anything poor quality. I now use them personally every night and take them wherever I go, but I prefer the Pro version because of how seamless it is for side sleeping. Being able to assure yourself the same consistency every night, no matter where you are, has been game-changing for my productivity. And given how much many of you like to fall asleep to lore, this could be a genuinely great idea. Use the code SME in the link in the description or pinned comment for 10% off your next purchase. Thanks again to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. I theorize that Radahn required the vessel of an Omen specifically for two main reasons: structural reinforcement and the capacity of horns to call and contain divinity, both to make himself into the ultimate vessel and anchor point for his divine jockey. First, I say structural reinforcement because so far as I can tell, none of the children of Marika can walk properly. Either they're losing their ability to move at all, or losing their ability to move gracefully. And as we will be exploring, those who are losing their ability to move at all sought to compensate for this issue with golden technology and mounts, while others sought to curb the growth of their bestial nature and movement with assistance from walking sticks and fusions to maintain their graceful, lordly posture. And that was the difference between the two in this fight. The thing that Morgott had, which Radahn did not. The difference that led to this defeat, which would be overcome by his new accursed vessel. This would be his chance to become the sculpted, horn-decked beast of the battlefield which he idolized, whose form and dance could house divinity, reborn into a royal bestial vessel to match his royal bestial soul, the lion he was bred to be, and the divine mount and other half he would ultimately become. This balance between bestial and spiritual and how that interacts with the movement and thus fate of divinity is the cornerstone of the afflictions we see the demigods suffering from. Their forms, in one way or another, are being destroyed by the powers they are born with. Their divine inheritance. The cure or solution to their degenerative state, like the Elden Ring and its counterbalanced twin runes, or the recipe for building a god, is balance. The right balance of bestial and spiritual. The right balance of blessings and curses. All of the demigods are suffering from a curse of some sort, but not all curses damage its host equally, nor manifest in a similar way. You can think of curses and blessings almost as genetic mutations and the way aspects of those mutations manifest between different children, with different spouse combinations. For example, perhaps you have your father's strength and mother's intellect, but you also have your father's cursed giant lineage in a body half made of your mother's side, cursed to crawl. The inheritance is therefore in some ways a blessing, and in others, a curse. The result is a cursed blessing. From the demigods we see, the effects of their cursed blessing are either apparent or very artfully hinted at in associated items and effects around them, with, you'll notice, very few actual depictions of them to confirm their status, I would argue, purposefully, to help hide evidence of any deformities and maintain the image of the Golden Order. There was actually a really cool short made by VaatiVidya recently, which concisely details a cut questline where Morgott's identity as an Omen and the Lord of Leyndell is exposed, and it's considered a total scandal that was previously unknown to the public. And just like this hidden secret, Messmer's serpentine nature that even his closest knights didn't know about until this disguise began to decay, Godwyn's form and current state, Rykard's own well-kept secret affliction, and I would wager all of the other demigods had similar physical deformities that they worked hard to keep from the public. Miquella is cursed with eternal nascency. Malenia is cursed to rot, which is a fate I would also suggest Rykard was subject to, given the implications of his depictions and clear indications of rot. Radahn is being crippled by the weight of his power and form, and looked somewhat sickly even before he was flower-powered. Mohg and Morgott are Omen, and Godwyn may very well have been something else entirely, closer to a beast like the Omen twins, and precisely how we see with Messmer, while Ranni's remains notably do not include any feet, and Melina is entirely bodiless. While all of these curses seem somewhat different, the result is the same in a few important ways. First of all, for all of them, their curses have a dual nature. Their curse is also a potential blessing, or rather the blessing of their power and lineage is also their curse. Miquella may never be able to mature, but he will be eternally youthful, free of decay and rot. Malenia may be doomed to rot, but it's a mechanism of sacrificial rebirth and ascension as well. Rykard may be subjected to the same fate of decay, perhaps even mental decay, given his manners guard, his own dialogue regarding family, and his personal knight's opinions of him. But the cycle of rebirth in rot and his shamanic lineage made ascension through melding possible. General Radahn's vessel is being crippled by his own weight and power, but from the same crushing stature, he has godlike strength, and perhaps his capacity to hold the very stars with his mastery of gravity magic, which he also uses to manipulate both his own body and his mount, is also owed to his immensity. The Omen are cursed with horns, which are shunned, and which damage them physically and warp their form, but through this sacrifice they can see formless guides, pierce through the outer realm, and appear to be capable of superhuman movement. Messmer is similar in both regards. His curse and innate power eat away at his vessel, but his kindling is capable of burning down even the sealing tree, and his true bestial form also grants him superhuman strength and speed. On the flip side, his suspected sister Melina, who's cursed to be bodiless, is kindling capable of burning the Erd tree and can even turn runes into power. And finally, Godwyn, Crown Prince of the Crucible, whose power was mighty enough to halt the ancient dragons, but whose form, I suspect, as we'll briefly explore soon, was grotesque and malformed. This first similarity of this dual nature of their cursed blessings is relevant to the second similarity they share, in that it's both the cause of, and solution to, the problem. The second similarity is that their cursed blessings appear to be degrading or stunting their physical form, and in every case, impacts the ability to walk or move to varying degrees between two extremes, either the absence of a physical body, closer to the ethereal nature of the primeval current, or the mass of a tangled and warped physical body, closer in form to the crucible of life. Either way, all these children of a god, a royal lineage that reached for the stars, are doomed, fated to crawl or be carried, being crippled by the divine power of their birthright. This curse of the vessel, of its movement really, has two extremes, spiritual and bestial. They're two sides of the same problem, and each one's weakness is the other's strength, and vice versa. Each of them suffer from one or the other, but succumbing to the extreme of either would be to sacrifice yourself to it. Doing so results in immense power, but costs everything. Like Malenia controlling the Scarlet Rot on the brink of death, compared to becoming the Scarlet Rot upon defeat. Or the difference between Sellen controlling the Graven Mass, or being lost in the sea of consciousness. A drop in the sea of the primeval current, like the headmasters mastering the knowledge of the primeval current, or sacrificing themselves to it. Or like wielding of aspects of the Crucible, as opposed to the loss of your mind and form to it. In regards to the curse of being a purely spiritual being, this amounts to having godlike power and divine capability, but being incapable of movement in the physical world, without a physical host or spiritual anchor, to the point of even fading away as the being they once were, or entirely, as suggested by Miquella's crown after his ascension, or Selen's ego into the graven mass. Melina is able to change runes to power and destroy even the Erd Tree, as well as guide us along the path of grace, but is incapable of moving about without us, or Torrent, and forfeits everything to unleash her true power, fading to nothing. Sarosh being the regent of the previous divine order and guiding Godfrey along the graceful path of a lord, while also being anchored to his being and sealing his true bestial nature. Fading to nothing to unleash true power when Godfrey surrenders to his bestial nature. Exactly like Miquella commanding the powers of a god with unalloyed guidance, being anchored to his promised consort, who moves for him in the physical realm, and whose own crown is on the cusp of fading into nothing. The formless mother guiding Mohg, but who cannot gain dominion into the world without his actions and the spreading of her blood through wounds, like the frenzy flame and the host it anchors itself to. Much like the fire giant sacrificing a part of its own flesh, losing its mobility in the physical realm, to invoke spirituality and surrender its vessel to its god. A vessel which almost seems specifically designed for this very purpose. And finally, Rani sacrificing her own flesh, to anchor her spirit onto an inanimate doll. A masterclass in the delicate balance of this state. This amounts to the divestment of the physical to invest in spiritual conductivity or compatibility at the cost of physical movement and the potential risk of losing your soul or mind to the ether. The opposite extreme is of the physical, bestial side. Having a godlike physical capacity, but instead of fading into nothing physically, fading mentally into the bestial frenzy, losing yourself to your base nature and becoming as much of an unthinking force as a star, finding a god within. This physical state is similarly a very fine line. In the same way succumbing to spirituality can cause you to lose yourself, so too can succumbing to your bestial nature. Like Godfrey losing himself to the wilds, literally losing his spiritual guide and his lordly name, fighting gracelessly instead as Horalu, without courtesy. Melania losing her dignity and succumbing to the Scarlet Rot for power, ultimately becoming Scarlet Rot itself as a result of giving in to her base nature. Mohg losing himself to bloodletting and being besotted by his wretched mire and wounding his formless mother for power, becoming more and more bestial than his tamed brother. Morgott succumbing to his rage over being forced into expelling his accursed fluids. Embracing bestial movements in his second phase, abandoning his attempts at graceful lordly stature supported by his makeshift cane. Just like Godfrey without Sarosh, giving into his own bestial nature and losing his grace as a lord in the process. Fighting and dying as a barbarian, losing his composure and mind to the frenzy of battle. General Radahn losing his mind to the battle and rot, also giving into his bestial nature and abandoning his graceful valor. Crawling and howling like a dog. And while I'll be noting on this later, I find the fact that his feet and shoes are missing when we see him particularly interesting, as his shoes were near identically made in the likeness of the Dryleaf sigil, a group whose arts were only for those who demonstrated worthy valor and character, and who follow and worship Miquella. These missing when we find him feels like visual storytelling for how he was and now is, fighting like a wild beast without valor or courtesy. Messmer surrendering to the base serpent and losing his grace and graceful form supported by his spear and serpents, instead literally slithering on his belly, and in doing so gain superhuman movement as a serpent, dying as a base monster, far from his lordly, graceful and valorous past. Rykard and his gluttony becoming a monster in the pursuit of his ambition, and escaping his rotting fate through a profane, debased rebirth sacrifice. So at one end, you sacrifice your physical form and risk becoming a part of the thing you are trying to control. And on the other hand, you sacrifice your mind to your body's cultivation, and risk becoming as much of an unthinking force as you would fading physically. Marika says, become a lord, a god, or a sacrifice. If becoming a sacrifice is ultimately to succumb to one's own divine cursed blessing, losing yourself and becoming the fleeting and immense power that is derived from the death of life, then to become a lord or god is to overcome that fate. To me, this is like a balancing act of the inner and outer realm. The more spiritual one is, the less they're physically comprised of, the more spiritually attuned they are to the point of possibly ceasing to exist as an individual altogether in the physical realm. Like the outer gods of the ether, without a vessel to inhabit. On the other hand, the more physical one is, the more power they can contain and gain in the physical realm, until they surrender to it altogether and become as much of an unthinking force of nature as the elements that comprise divinity. The sweet spot, so to speak, is the correct balancing act of blessings to cancel out the negative effects of your own. The right amount of one curse and the right amount of another, a grafted balance of the physical and spiritual. Like the Elden Ring being a series of twin parts that make up a beast that is the incarnation of order, being held in a god whose rune is a lattice, holding them together. In almost all of the children, we see an attempt of doing this, of following Marika's words. If halting the movement of the stars is what halted their fate, that would mean their movement is their fate. So just like Radahn did to the stars, to have one's movement curtailed, either by state of mind or body, is to have one's own fate directly affected. Each of the demigods have their own way of escaping or transcending this restriction of fate, which you'll notice as we go through the examples, and each one is directly related to this concept of spiritual and bestial, and the melding of both in a balancing act to escape their personal curse. Melina is bodiless, and I would even wager her curse is her bodiless nature, as well as the fact that even though she alone can walk perfectly, she is ironically cursed to be bound to another to rely on for movement, only otherwise perhaps capable of appearing at discovered sites of grace. Originally, seemingly like Miquella, she does this through the use of a beast, Torrent, a fine example of this balancing act of beast and spirit, like the female Albinaurix for example. And later, also like Miquella, assumes a more humanoid mount. Her state of being, the result of her curse, may have also been an inspiration to the following two demigods, and how they escaped their own fates. If the vessel cannot contain the essence without decaying, shed the vessel and anchor the soul to something that can. Ranni's remains have no feet, and even in her doll form she is rarely seen standing, let alone walking, almost as if it's unnatural for her. The only time we even see her doll form walk is after her own rebirth, right before her ascension, like Miquella and the Egg and Divine Gates. You can see why I consider these fingers to be their own form of divine gate, and this nude Ranni to have undergone a rebirth like Bok, in this video here. Though this could just be because she's operating a doll, not an actual body, which I am certain would have its own drawbacks. She escaped her fate by shedding her flesh and anchoring her spirit to an ageless doll, which is like her equivalent of a tarnished or torrent for Melina, or torrent and the promised consort for Miquella. Her journey similarly includes assistance from meldings of beast and man, which take the form of sacrifices. Miquella is only ever seen walking in the Shadow Realm after his real or original body has been sacrificed, otherwise travelling on torrent and being held by another, or seen in memories and depicted in statues, sitting, and only seen walking again after his ascension, promptly anchoring himself to his divine beast, who moves for him. Malenia has unalloyed leg prosthetics which move like her and her offshoots unalloyed prosthetic arms, with presumably the only statue of her and Miquella also depicting them in a sitting position, and only in a location where things considered deformities or abominations are accepted, or otherwise in a literal hideaway. Radahn is always on Leonard even in his talisman, presumably including in their childhood during his spars with his Albinauric best friend who suffers from the same or similar condition. His condition, like the others, may be a progressive one, like that of the Albinaurix, or the rot of Malenia, since we only ever see him slightly move his legs in the cinematic preparing for his showdown. taking no more than a single step at any time. And even then, like in our first fight with him, despite being able to manipulate gravity to the point he can temporarily fly, he's relying heavily on his mount to support his weight and frame, who he's also constantly manipulating with gravity magic. What's more, the way they fight together despite his state of mind would suggest this way of fighting is natural to them, the standard. Working like two halves of one being, like the Albinoric women and divine beast, while also manipulating both his mount and his own lower half with gravity magic for the entirety of our first encounter. I find this kind of suspect, not only because of the similarities to other beings who rely on a fusion to move, but also, considering he idolizes Godfrey, you'd think he'd be showing off a bit more flesh. But this only happens when he has a new body. If our fate and the fate of the gods are tied to the fate of the stars, then learning gravity magic to challenge the stars is not only a way of challenging his own fate, but also a way to counter the symptoms of his fate by manipulating the laws that were leading to his gradual disablement, past the point of being able to hide it publicly. Until that point in time, in order to protect his mighty image and not detract from his aspirations to be like the stomp-happy Godfrey, I would imagine, if I'm right, many measures would have been taken to ensure people didn't find out about his condition, or any of the other demigods' conditions for that matter. This is why I'd imagine that just like his siblings, all of who are cursed, there are very few, if any, paintings or statues of them, despite their status as half-gods. A singular one in the Volcano Manor, no less, a place dedicated to undoing the golden image of the Erd Tree and revealing all of its hypocrisy and secrets. Radahn is only ever seen donning shining armor and covering every inch of skin even while idolizing a man who wears as little as possible, like Malenia's helmet and golden armor covering up her own brutal decay, even in her single portrait. The final time we see Radahn before the bloom, he even looks very unwell past the point of hiding it, so perhaps this final battle was also meant as a pre-planned mercy death as part of the vow, to end him at his peak before his decaying appearance could be discovered. Any speculation on his appearance past Malenia's bloom would then simply be blamed on the effects of her attack. As I said before, I think the lack of paintings and statues of these demigod children may have even been a strategic move to limit their visibility, making any disfigurement or disabilities difficult to see or substantiate. Even the paintings we do have of them give away signs of their decay, or are otherwise covered by helmets and armor showing as little skin as possible. His mastery of gravity magic would have also helped him to manipulate his own limbs and offset the effects of his curse and the physical burden on his mount. And on that note, his inseparable bond with Leonard being disregarded as simply his kind nature worked to shield the reality of his symbiosis, like the Albinoric women and their wolves, the boar rider and his boar, Loretta and her horse, or to be even more obvious, the cheap knockoff protecting Trina. Another interesting thought that may support this supposed cover-up is that if he was close enough to Miquella to have not only been his promised consort, but to have had a vow since childhood that endured which would result in this alleged condition being effectively cured, then perhaps, like I have previously theorized, they had always been on a very close standing. If Radahn was suffering in this way from a curse, then of course as he attempted to for Godwyn and his own sister, Miquella would attempt to alleviate the condition however he could, both physically and to shield the pride of his champion and brother, like crafting him a weapon that would make him as powerful afar as he is up close, which could be wielded on horseback, or crafting him golden armor like Malenia's that could aid his movement and ease his burden, channeling his unalloyed powers. If this were the case, we should see hints that suggest this, and there are in fact, plenty. His mighty bow bearing the crowned beast motif and a winding tail has been masterfully crafted to display two golden lilies, like those most favoured by Miquella. Some have argued it also resembles a lion's tail, which we also see presented as floral and lily-like elsewhere, which is a brilliant example of the union of these concepts, and frankly even more perfect. If you think I'm just coping about the lilies being depicted as a meshing of lion's tails in the flower, here are several more examples. But if that isn't enough, his armor bears designs outrageously similar to those of Miquella's on the dryleaf satchel. and his cape also appears very similar to the Halig tree, a lot like Malenia's own cape as well. And this goes right down to his shoes, which even among the shoes of Elden Ring are a strangely specific design. They resemble the Dryleaf Sigil, followers of Miquella, whose footwork art specialise in movement by throwing your body around, and their talisman, which looks strikingly similar to Radahn's shoes, boosts Miquella's incantations specifically. If ever there was an armor piece or clothing designed to assist whatever it was worn on, it would be a combination of those things. So, to the original point, there is at least some evidence that Miquella could have also helped his promised consort with PR and keeping his image untarnished until his rebirth into a body free of decay, which was fully mobile, adopting more normal-looking shoes once he has this new body. We never see Rykard walk or see his lower half in paintings, and even in the paintings that exist, there appears to be strong evidence of him rotting. We only see him standing briefly during the Phase 2 in his new, reborn form within the Serpent, otherwise assuming a sitting position throughout the battle. And it looks like this one instance of standing for a special attack took considerable effort, considering he is otherwise essentially scooting around. This body swapping or melding ascension by fusing himself with another creature to support his form is not only like Radahn's own body hopping in his ascension and melding with Mohg's bestial body, but similarly is an attempt at using a curse as a blessing, and thus altering one's own composition to better suit their own cursed blessing. Now, Rykard can escape the limits of decay by shedding his skin and rolling around in fire, the element that staves off scarlet rot. Similarly, Radahn can escape the effects of decay with blood that burns away scarlet rot and horns that reinforce his stature. Worth an honourable mention as well are Renala's other non-demigod children, the demigods' half-siblings, who are all born incapable of walking entirely, with legs akin to Albinaurix, or even larvae of some kind. We never see Godwyn walk, nor are there any statues or paintings of him, which, given his position as a scion of the Golden Bough and such an important figure, you'd expect to see at least perhaps a single display of him. Yet there are none. Again, was this done perhaps to protect his image? Are there any depictions of him outside of his murder portrait and death that maybe show his lower half? The only time we hear about him presumably moving quite a lot was during the defense of Leyndell. The only time in history the walls of the city have been breached, and no doubt an incredible moment worthy of depictions in statues and other pieces of art. And yet we see nothing. Or maybe we do. The only depictions commemorating the event are worn by the most awestruck knights who wear a malformed dragon helmet with hair and a tail in likeness of Godwyn's own. They're even altering their own likeness and form to mimic dragons, after determining from watching Godwyn's defense of Leyndell that only a dragon could defend the Erd Tree. You can see that rabbit hole here in a previous video. Perhaps his true form was something more akin to the depiction of the malformed dragon or a deformed basilisk as seen in this brilliant video, like Messmer's true form being the base serpent hidden behind the thin veil of his withering royal disguise. If this form is a progressive deterioration or perhaps metamorphosis, then maybe like Radahn's planned mercy killing, Godwyn's own murder was also a planned event to prevent his decay going public or becoming more noticeable. A scandal to overshadow his hidden appearance. He was even being buried far underground, hidden away at the same depths as a nameless city, hidden royal Omen, and the Three Fingers. And this is once more potentially just like Messmer. If this single statue of Marika and a baby really is Messmer when he was young, then perhaps his condition was also progressive and treated with his mother's blessings and seals. And when this was no longer enough, his final crusade and sealing was planned, to prevent his serpentine nature, which was apparently a secret, from inevitably going public. Resigning that truth and many others to the veiled Shadowlands, there being no more depictions of him after this very early point. And no other demigods getting any afterwards either, with exception to the twins whose statues are hidden away, suggests to me it was a lesson learned and no more depictions were produced, lest their royal secrets get leaked like Radagon is Marika. Messmer supports his movement with his spear, like Morgott and his cane, or Mohg and his staff, or his own Omenhorn nobles and their swords. or the Omen-horned Hornsent and their canes. But this isn't because he can't physically move with ease, it's to maintain a lordly posture, like Serosh does for Godfrey. Messmer is just like the Omen in that an unnatural lord-like posture and movement is what they need assistance with, because their base, bestial, serpentine, horned and winged forms are the physical extreme of the cursed blessing. While he's granted extraordinary movement and power with his true form, Messmer loses the graceful form and posture of a lord, and is literally forced to crawl on his belly. While the Omen twins can attain great abilities and movement capabilities from succumbing to their accursed blood, they end up moving like beasts. Like Godfrey shedding his bestial guide and gaining immense power, but relinquishes his lord name and returns to his barbarian roots in a battle frenzy, fighting like a bear. The curse of the serpent appealed to Rykard as a means to escape his own curse, and the curse of the Omen appealed to Radahn as a way to escape his. And so, unlike his brother who chose the path of the serpent and melded his form to attain its cursed blessing, so that he may devour the gods, Radahn chose the path of the beastly Omen twins, which he himself would literally become. A twin beast, to cavort and stomp and dance the divine dance. If the boon of the serpent is its ability to devour, assimilate, and shed, then what are the boons of horns? What are the cursed blessings of the Omen, and why are they the key to divinity? Horns are important in two main ways, physically and spiritually. They're a prominent feature cross-culturally and across species, as both a symbol of supremacy and power. And their presence on a number of divine-associated items and individuals is by design. First, in regard to physical reinforcement, unlike serpents, in Messmer's case, they can't actively consume you, mostly. It's like benign cancer instead of malignant, mostly. So as a matter of physical reinforcement, they're the better option and easier to shape, as we'll soon discuss. We see evidence of the physical reinforcement in the nobles of Mohgwyn, whose horns act as structural reinforcement in their feet, which no doubt allows them to be as agile as they are. They're supporting themselves with a cane like the others, as we discussed earlier, to maintain a lord or noble-like posture and grace. And they're not the only example. Similarly, the red Albinaurics, after they have undergone their death pact, also grow horns along with their new colour. This makes them notably more agile than their grey counterparts, stronger physically, and as we will discuss soon, even allows them to call spirits. Horns were once an irrefutable sign of primacy, offering massive resistances and reinforcement. The bullgoat's horn talisman and armour, spiral horn shield and crucible aspects all make it clear that horns are a physical reinforcement and offer an array of physical resistances and immunities. But beyond that, and of even higher importance, is the pervasive association of horns with divinity. The worshipped ancestor spirit beasts display power gathering in their horned remains and channel souls through their crown, their horns, like how the Erd tree roots purify and distill divinity from the dregs. The Hornsent believe themselves better innately because of this cursed blessing, granting them the capacity to cast incantations of normalized crucible current and abyssal flame, a flame that wouldn't take purchase in Messmer's own soldiers, but which the Hornsent could call upon innately, like the fire was in their blood, like Omen. The secret of their power perhaps like the Albinaurics pertaining to their natural arcaneness and bloodline, and they even share the same posture as the Omen nobles and royalty, who share the same hornheel as the Omen-like Hornsent lamenters. They used silver and gold horns as currency for the elite, and the specimen tower is strewn with all manner of horned beasts and horns, all which look strikingly similar to these figures enwreathing their central statue, like the venerated tutelary deities and the figure of worship on the outer god talisman that looks strikingly similar to these two figures in the specimen tower and the Omen twins. The one-eyed fell god of the giants, which haunts the Hornsent sagas and whose image was used to mock them as they were destroyed, is depicted on the furnace golems, with a crown of horns, exactly as portrayed elsewhere. Like the fell gods, fire giants who are depicted on a shield, and the chariots as also donning a crown of horns, just like the Hornsent. And this connection is so deep and primal for the Hornsent that the visage of the fell god can be seen growing from the backs of the lamenters, whose hair is the same red and blonde as the fire giant Sigil. A similar split of colours to Radagon and Marika, or Miquella and Radahn. The Horned Warriors, Divine Beast Warriors, the Divine Beasts themselves, and the Horned Shaman. All use their horns to invoke divinity, and I'd say the same goes for this central statue we see throughout the Divine City. If horns are used to conduct and house divinity, then that is very likely the purpose of these very horn-like objects wrapping around the two figures, and explains why we'd see them as a crown on the old gods. Horns in that sense would be the literal keys to divinity, allowing one to physically conduct and collect the essence of the heavens, like the tutelary deities, or the horned swords, like the horns of Baal calling lightning he uses to ascend, the horned golden rams calling lightning, or the horned divine beasts themselves, manipulating powers that contain the same gold as the Golden Order. I think this is why the divine beasts are called sculpted keepers. They have sculpted their body and horns to enable themselves to channel divine power, dedicating themselves to the cultivation of the vessel to the divine state of primacy at the expense of their own minds, allowing them to act as vessels for influences of the outer realm and partake in a divine dance. This association between horns and a connection to the heavens even extends to the horn of the envoys, which they declare the movements of divinity with, creating bubbles, which is yet another connection between the old gods and the new, as we see the denizens of the ancient dynasty of blood and fire looking into bubbles to search for lost oracles. There's also the contrast between the spirit-calling horn of the Tibia Mariner and the spirit-calling horn of the Red Albinorix, whose secret powers are derived from their innate arcaneness. These comparisons are meant to make you consider what horns actually are, since we've seen serpents and other similar creatures as binding and conductive agents used in similar ways. Whatever these other things that act like conductors and look like horns are, in the most basic sense, horns are the petrified version of it. Physical masses consisting of the aspects from which they were grown, or what they consumed before being petrified, the composition of which will offer a different effect, like the solidified caterpillars on the mask of the potentates, or like a centipede feasting on gold pests found near golden trees becoming gold, and the uses derived from their composition, and the many other examples we have of you are what you eat in Elden Ring, and how the parts of those beings are used. I'll be diving into the biological alchemy in the next video, so if that interests you, remember to subscribe so you don't miss it. Mohg embodies both the physical and spiritual capabilities of the Omen curse at the expense of his own mind. Just like the effect of the horned beasts impairs focus, Mohg's left eye, which is often used to denote the spirit or soul, is being pierced by his horns, really exemplifying his dedication to the untampered purity of his blood to the point of ascendant qualities, like the extra finger denoting a blessing of ascended beings being a literal horn finger, used to pierce the veil and conduct the power of the formless mother, wounding his own mother like a beast in frenzy, eating its own family for strength. His acceptance and cultivation of his accursed blood is so profound that there is a striking likeness between him and the face of the fell god beginning to spawn on the back of the lamenters who followed the horn-scent practices to its furthest reaches. Their hair is red and gold like the fire giant's talisman, whose one-eyed fell god also dons a crown of horns. Fitting for the horn-crowned one-eyed son of a god who wishes to revive the ancient dynasty of the fell god, and whose brother assumes the title of Fell Omen. The signature of the Omen's curse and reason they were shunned, their horns, were in fact in more ways than one, a genuine blessing, almost like a divine antenna, crafted and cultivated into an ancient bloodline through complicated biological alchemy, putting the Dung-Eater's despair into better context, like being born quirkless, or a muggle. All in all, they offer physical reinforcement in movement and resistance, as well as serve as an antenna and anchor point for divinity. The perfect combination to conduct and house Miquella's fragile, ephemeral godly state. So if it had to be an omen for the physical and spiritual boons, why did it have to be Mohg? Why not Morgott? There's another important reason an omen's vessel is required aside from the physical reinforcement and spiritual benefits bestowed by the omen's horns, and that's the omen's blood. The blood of the old god. Mohg was entirely besotted by his own defilement, and cultivated his accursed blood to the furthest degree. His complete surrender to his nature shows in his monstrous bestial appearance compared to his tame twin brother, as well as his ability to seamlessly call forth the fiery blood of the formless mother. He quite literally is the Lord of Blood. Morgott, on the other hand, forsook his accursed blood and actively suppressed it his entire life, only faltering when we beat him into submission like a cornered animal. He squandered and spoiled his own accursed blood, and instead shaped his body and soul in duty to the Erd Tree, reflected in his far more human-like form and innate ability to cast special golden incantations. Unlike the rotting flesh of Malenia and potentially other demigods, the blood of the Omen isn't prone to rot. Fire is the element which staves off scarlet rot, as seen in Rykard's actions and Radahn's own great rune. And thus, blood of fire would naturally stave off the effects of rot. If Miquella's Age of Compassion were to last, the vessel for his vision would also need to last just as long. If the vessel decays, so too does the vision. And so in this regard, the resistances that came with the cultivation of his accursed blood were the perfect counterbalance to the decay and rot we've seen other demigods close to Radahn subjected to. As the timeless conductive instruments to divinity we've seen them act as across multiple cultures and species, horns are, as we've discussed, an excellent vector to the heavens. Mohg cultivated his own horns even to the apparent detriment of other parts of his body, resulting in ascendant qualities like a sixth horned finger capable of piercing the formless mother. Meanwhile, Morgott forsook this blessing and carved it from his vision, blinding himself to its call and influence in favour of the Erd Tree. The horns Mohg cultivated were the purest, highest quality form of the accursed blood, capable of piercing the veil to the outer realm. Mohg's horns were cultivated like a blessing. Morgott's were managed like a curse. Just as we discussed earlier about losing yourself to the extreme, the pure cultivation of horns and becoming besotted by one's own defilement leaves one susceptible to a lapse in focus. This zealous pursuit of the divine beast can lead to frenzy, or a deep slumber, losing yourself mentally and thus technically physically, just as we see with Sellen and the Graven Mass. An example of this problem being balanced out of existence are the ancestral followers, who cultivate their horns with a more balanced approach, enough to keep their sense about them to manage their system of belief and have a lifestyle in harmony with the world around them. This is reinforced to me in the fact the Spiral Horn Shield and 2 of the 3 clarifying charms are found by the ancestral followers, with the final one found on a Lamenter, which is about as far as you can go before losing your mind to horn cultivation and retaining a sense of self, literally on the verge of being a vessel to another host. The balancing of these primal qualities is why I find these horn charms an excellent representation of both the recipe to create a sustainable and enduring god. The balancing of these primal qualities is why I find these horn charms an excellent representation of both the recipe to create a sustainable and enduring god, and the balancing act behind the Elden Ring itself: focus, robustness, and immunity, mind, body, and soul. What makes Mohg perfect as a vessel is his mindless pursuit of his body's cultivation, and his blind faith. This mental flaw in his design overall, what would be his curse, is both what allowed for his perfect cultivation as a vessel, and for him to be a suitable host to a new mind and soul, changing this curse of his blessing into another blessing. This is like the Hornsent who place their faith above all else, and bend to the physical form of the horns, and have troubled focus as a result. They are succeeding in their asceticism, but losing themselves as an individual in the process. This focused cultivation for the sake of the body as a vessel to the heavens maximizes the physical form and spiritual conductivity, at the expense of the mind of the individual. Like the Divine Beast and their masks and form, or the Hornsent Inquisitors and Shaman, since it's the mighty minds of both Radahn, which was capable of halting even the stars, and Miquella, who's the most fearsome prodigy, as well as the valorous champion soul of Radahn, and unalloyed soul of Miquella, there was no need for Mohg to have a mind. Cultivating his physical and spiritual capacity at the complete expense of his mind was how his vessel was so pure. And that's what Miquella and Radahn needed, the unyielding blood of the old fell god. The blood of the beast. Horns having the negative effect of physically damaging the body and also leaving you susceptible to madness or sleep. In other words, a loss of focus, losing oneself to the bestial frenzy or eternal slumber, is portrayed beautifully in Mohg, with his left eye being pierced by his horns, which he allowed to grow out of control in a state of frenzied, besotted defilement. His left eye, the one usually denoting the presence of a soul or force, has been blinded by his devotion to cultivating his horns, leaving him entirely influenced by the formless mother. And this blind devotion is turned now to Miquella. He has in effect lost his mind to the cause. Morgott's left eye remains, burning with the golden gleam of grace, like his burning loyalty to the Erd Tree and his duty. Instead, his right eye, representing the physical state, is covered in the shaved remains of horns which he stunted the cultivation of, a no doubt very painful act of loyalty to the Erd Tree and his resolve to his duty. You can see this video here on the meaning of left and right limbs and eyes, and these other examples of the concept. But to me, this is an indication of the state of the soul and vessel, with Morgott's soul being cultivated as we see in his devout duty, but his body being broken as we see in his shaved horns and withering human appearance. Mohg's soul is blinded in his devotion to his own defilement, and his mind lost to his pursuit, while his body is perfectly cultivated and overtly bestial. Just as Mohg's faith in the formless mother and his accursed blood is so immense, he can innately cast incantations by virtue of his physical composition. Morgott is a loyal hound, while Mohg is a primal apex beast. Overall, Mohg's vessel was the perfect mindless canvas from which to sculpt the Keeper of Miquella, and guard the Age of Compassion. Like the makeup of the Elden Ring itself, this recipe on the Divine Scroll is a combination, a divine balancing act. The intended state of the Elden Ring is a combination of a lord, a god, and a sacrifice, and that's the final state we see of Radahn, Miquella, and Mohg. A lord, a god, and a sacrifice. It's like the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, just not being able to pick which you are. Like being a part of the divine dancing beast, but maybe the back half in the Dutch oven. For Miquella's vision of an age of compassion to come to fruition, the makeup of them as the structure guiding the growth of the vision would need to be the perfect combination to embody that age. Unshakable and eternal foundations, unwavering and unyielding will, and all-encompassing compassion backed by godly power. All three sacrificed their body, soul, and mind to varying degrees. And in the end, all three remained in a balanced capacity comprised of the parts that were left. By the time Miquella had divested all else, his vision of compassion was pure and unalloyed, free of any defiling elements like ego, favoritism, or prejudice. However, by divesting all but the necessities, his existence itself was fleeting. Radahn's will and mind could bring him to halt the stars, and even resist the scarlet rot, while his valor and character charmed the charmer. But his body was decaying and rotting, his form was fleeting. Mohg's body was capable of harnessing divinity, and his blood burned against decay, but his mind and soul were besotted by his own defilement. His mind and who he was fleeting. By divesting the fly in each ointment, the melding of their best parts would be seamless, balanced, and unbreakable. The final product these three ingredients create is a perfectly harmonious, balanced combination of extremes, an unalloyed golden order, like the trifecta once established between Radagon, Marika, and the Elden Beast, only without the fickle nature of the gods that shattered it. Radahn's unyielding fiery ambition, champion's valor, mighty mind, and unbreakable will, without the curse of his ailing vessel. Miquella's all-encompassing compassion, divine power, and his Empyrean right, without the curse of his nascency. And Mohg's ultra-resistant, superconductive godbod, without the frenzied besotting. The issue with Mohg was his soul, and just like the state of the body can corrupt the soul, so too can the state of the soul corrupt the body. For example, Great runes appear to be intimately connected to their shardbearer, taking on their characteristics. Mohg's burns like his own accursed blood, and he himself. Morgott's looks as though it's been cleansed and polished, as he is. Malenia's is rotting as she does. Rykard's is serpentine like he is. And Radahn's burns as we see him also burn to resist the scarlet rot. I think this is part of the reason Mohg was able to cultivate his accursed form to its fruition, and as a result sport so many horns that it affects him physically, no matter the cost, thus besotted by his own defilement, shaped and cultivated by his own defiled will. When his body is host to Radahn's soul and will instead, whatever previously prevented Radahn from growing horns would be currently preventing the growth of any new horns, and perhaps even his soul burning to resist further encroachment of the Omen curse. Exactly like how the Omen blood of his new body would burn to resist the encroachment of rot and decay, which his old body was succumbing to. And that's just one example of how the arrangement could work. A perfect harmony of curses, working to balance one another in a specially crafted vessel. The structural reinforcement of the horns allowing him to move like the bestial Omen, but in the right locations to allow for the posture of a graceful lord, with profound mastery of gravity that allows him to take those advantages beyond their limits. The physical resistances of Omen horns and blood, paired with Radahn's innately resistant will and mind. Blood of flame that will never decay or rot, with a mind that will never falter or fade, working together to shoulder the 1,000-year age of compassion. Custom built with the capacity to call and contain divinity as an anchor point for Miquella. An eternal vessel for an eternal soul bearing an eternal vision. We see the same balancing act in the composition of the Elden Ring itself in the corresponding runes, which are literally a beast of order, bound together with the singular twinned combination of Marika and Radagon. The beast itself also looks like an amalgamation of man and beast, with the file name Nebula Dragon. A trueborn heir, as some would say. I think this comparison combination is why the old Elden Ring bears such a striking likeness to Miquella, but this time it isn't an ascendant man-beast that comprises the Elden Ring. It's a being that has divested everything except a vision of compassion and love, with the connection to the power required to enact it. Instead of a twinned rebus of man and woman holding a humanoid beast within them that is the Order. It's a twinned entity of beast and man, upon whose shoulders the Order rests and guides in its purest form. An Order untainted by the fickle alloys, like the emotions of the prior gods that were the fly in the ointment, as Goldmask identified. An Order set on its path without the capacity for corruption, for the sake and benefit of everyone else, and not for the benefit of the holder of the vision, who gave up everything to this eternal duty and state of being. The difference between fickle words of love, cursed with all manners of alloys, and a mother's love, unconditional and unalloyed. It's the ingredients of the God Scroll, but read the right way. Not for the sake of the god, but for the sake of the subjects of the coming age, executed by the most brilliant and compassionate of the demigod Empyreans, not for his own gain, but to his own detriment and eternal duty. To create unalloyed compassion and, for everyone, lay the foundations for a real chance at a true Eden in these shattered lands. How horns came to be and what they're made of, what they truly represent, and the ancient dynasty that they owe their roots to is a part of the next video I'll be releasing. So if you enjoyed this video and want to see how deep the rabbit hole really goes, be sure to subscribe for the next long form. I'd intended to release my long form instead of this video, but I've been dealing with a chronic illness that continues to surprise me with how much it can change my physical capacity and energy levels. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed, please feed the video hype points and likes. Thank you to my Patreon and YouTube members for your ongoing support, patience, and generosity.